In this video, Melissa from the Notice That podcast is joining me in our conversation with Dr. Arielle Schwartz. Arielle has a new book. I think it's number 6 for her, Therapeutic Yoga for Trauma Recovery. And in our conversation, we talk about Arielle's book, about yoga, the polyvagal theory, and the integration of somatic psychology into our EMDR work. This conversation has so much good information for anyone who's interested in healing and beyond. Here is the conversation with Dr. Arielle Schwartz.
Sattva is about balance and ease and connection and calmness. And Rajas in our sympathetic state can be turbulent. It's got energy, it's got movement, it can be intense, right? And Tamas has more stagnancy, has more stillness. So this yogic philosophy has these parallels to polyvagal theory in terms of recognizing the three states of the autonomic nervous system. Sometimes I use this metaphor that the states of our being are like a lake in the mountains, these places I like to go in the world, right? And when we're in a sattvic state of mind, that lake is clear and calm, and it reflects the sky and the puffy clouds and the mountains surrounding the lake, and you get this clear reflection. When we're in that rajasic state, the turbulence can lead to choppiness, right? We get white caps on the water. We lose that clear reflection. And when we're in the tamasic state, we get so much stagnancy that algae is growing on the surface, right? And again, we're going to lose that clear reflection of who we really are. And what's really stunning about yoga as a practice that we can bring into therapy is that actually, and there's a parallel with EMDR, which I'll say in a moment, but there's that yoga relies upon the premise that we are already whole. Mm-hmm. We are already whole, that what we are doing is we are removing the obstacles that stand between us and that knowledge or that awareness of our own wholeness, of our own intrinsic capacity. Think about AIP and what that relies upon in EMDR. Adaptive information processing also recognizes that when given sufficient support, every individual has within us the capacity to process challenging or difficult life events, right? And that is being organized by this internal wisdom that we all have access to. And when we're in that sweet spot of the social engagement system or that ventral vagal circuit, in that sattvic state of mind, we have that clear reflection where we have access to that inner wisdom and clarity.
That's beautiful. There's so much about encountering the body in that way that, to me, gives a much deeper understanding of AIP. Because there's a lot of conversation around the complexities of working with C-PTSD, because there isn't lived experience that give clients access to adaptive experience. But I think the richness of somatic psych means that we can tap into what is adaptive about having a human body and being this human organism that is present in every person. And I find so much support in knowing how to link into that and how to help clients experience the natural adaptive ability of the human self, regardless of how much trauma we've had. And so I love that way of framing it for people.
Yeah. And I think that one of the key elements about, at least, I'm just going to say the key elements really across the board that we're bringing in to our work as therapists is that yoga isn't necessarily something that we're applying as an intervention for our client. It is a state of being that we're bringing into the room. I mean, certainly there are practices and interventions that we can do, but if we're not sitting in that own seat of our own wisdom center, of that own ventral vagal capacity, of our own co-regulating capacity, then our clients are going to feel that as well. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to fluctuate in our nervous system states, that we're not going to at times be informed by our client's nervous system of what it feels like to be them, times of terror, times of rage, right? That's going to be an important element to bring into the room. One of the key aspects of polyvagal theory that I didn't mention before, but is really worth mentioning, is that while we have these three states, right, our three lakes, we also have in polyvagal theory what we talk about as hybrid nervous system states, which is that we can bring the clarity of that sattvic or that social nervous system into the sympathetic nervous system. So at times when we are feeling revved up or anxious, and if we create this capacity to simultaneously feel connected or safe now as we bring attention to that revved up nature, then something new happens. It's like we've got a little alchemy going on, and we can experience the benefits of our sympathetic nervous system that help us go into states of play and excitement and joy and climbing a mountain, right? Or working through something really hard with courage. And we also can create that hybrid state with the parasympathetic dorsal vagal state, where when we're feeling dull or collapsed or even somewhat dissociated and depressed, if we bring that wisdom and clarity of the social engagement system there, then we can access states of stillness and grace and the nourishment of a deep meditation or a deep spiritual experience, which actually resides in that sweet spot.
So would you say that this hybrid model is that if you're bringing resourcing into phase 4, into desensitization, so maybe you're titrating, like you mentioned earlier, titrating the reprocessing when there's too much activated sympathetic activation, and then bringing a resource to kind of regulate the pace?
Yeah, so we can co-regulate relationally, and we can also co-regulate with these resources. They become kind of co-therapists in the room. So we can bring in allies, right? We can bring in imaginal repair scenes. We can bring in images and memories of times in which you felt safe, loved, connected, a pet, right? All of these can actually help us access that that nourishment. And then we can oscillate between the courage it takes to go towards something difficult, but my goodness, we can take our whole team with us.
So this feels so connected. There's some research that I've been encountering lately around the complexity and somatic work of, as we help people step into more somatic awareness, interoceptive awareness, that is not a guarantee of resolution of symptoms. It's not even a guarantee of feeling better. There's this other essential ingredient that must be present, which is what we're talking about here, of I must be able to be in a place of self-compassion and self-acceptance as I'm experiencing all of this. Yeah. And it really helps us understand why this way of bringing in resources and allies and EMDR just feels so magical sometimes. Because as they're moving into a deeper awareness of the distress and the pain of their experience, we are also bringing in these allies and resources to hold that self-compassion, and things release so profoundly when both of those things are happening in the same body.
Yes, it's so true. And I think that anytime we're bringing a mindfulness practice into the room, whether that's meditation-based practices or yoga-based practices, or just mindful self-awareness and interoceptive awareness, as you name, we have that option to bring compassion right along the way. In fact, we really need to bring compassion. You named curiosity as one of those signals of being in the social engagement system, and I think compassion is another one. And so it lets us access the felt sense in a different way. Speaking of some of the research on interoceptive awareness and what facilitates change, I have a deep appreciation of the work of Cynthia Price, who does a whole lot of research on interoception. And she has a paper out there that speaks about sustained interoceptive awareness that leads to somatic reappraisal. And I love the terminology that she offers, especially when we think about what we're achieving in EMDR when we're looking for cognitive reappraisal. But what is somatic reappraisal? Somatic reappraisal means that not only did I kind of reflect and change the narrative, but I change it in relationship to what am I sensing and feeling now, so that as I'm experiencing something that has maybe been an area of avoidance or an area of discomfort that I haven't known how to relate to. And now I have a new ability to sustain awareness now in a safely held environment and have a new experience. I could handle it. Wow. I had big feelings and you were there with me, and I wasn't alone with that for the first time in my life. I thought that I would be rejected if someone saw me feeling this way, and you didn't reject me. Whatever accompanies now the new felt sense with a reappraisal about oneself and one's relational experience and so forth.
And that's memory reconsolidation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it just emerges like when we're able to bring the body along in that way and be so deeply engaged with the sensorial quality of it, memory reconsolidation happens so much more fluidly. It's like we don't have to effort around it nearly as much because all of the essential ingredients are there.
So I want to make sure that I understand what you said, Arielle. So the new narrative that is happening as a result of this work is not only cognitively, but there's a new somatic narrative. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that we're actually in relationship narratively with our somatic experience. When, for example, if you look at the research about chronic pain, that we can see that there's the pain itself, that very often that pain is a remnant, it's like a memory, it's even a procedural memory, right, of something that maybe no longer has physical cause. But then there's all of these contributing factors, right? There's our memories of other times when we felt this. There's our belief about ourselves in relationship to the sensation. There's our belief about whether or not we can handle the sensation, all of the appraisals around that. And so we're actually allowing ourselves to stay with sensation and cultivate a new narrative, even a chosen narrative that's more empowering for the self.
Yeah, I think that part of this narrative, what I see a lot of times with clients when doing EMDR and somatic work, is the change of posture, and something that you mentioned in the book, and we also discussed, in our community. So I'm wondering if you can talk about a little bit about posture in yoga, in therapy, and how what can we do? What can we actively do to use posture to help our clients to improve posture and to improve their mental state?
Yeah. So I want to lean in for a moment to some of the science around vagal tone and posture, and then we'll come back to what do we do. So some of the science around this, it actually goes back into the 1980s when there was again, kind of very seminal research on the relationship between posture and vagal tone. When we talk about vagal tone, we're really looking at the engagement of the vagus nerve to help us navigate the sympathetic nervous system. So when we have low vagal tone, we actually aren't able to really put the brakes on the sympathetic nervous system. And so the sympathetic nervous system is basically left unchecked, right? So vagal tone lets us kind of tap the brakes and negotiate with our sympathetic system. Sympathetic nervous system is necessary. It's not bad. We just live quite out of balance with it in our modern world, right? And we also have another term here, which is called vagal efficiency. And vagal efficiency basically means how well can I adapt to the challenges of my world, and how well does my kind of vagus nerve help me adapt by either kind of pulling the brakes off, which let my sympathetic nervous system respond to a challenge. And then how well does it go back on in order for my system to recover or recalibrate? All right, there's a lot in there. And it's a really important element, because when we look, for example, at some of the measures of vagal efficiency, we look at how well do we adapt to postural changes in our environment. So for example, if we're laying down, we're sitting up, we're standing up, And if we don't have great vagal efficiency, our blood pressure doesn't adapt quickly enough to that standing, and we'll get dizzy or we might faint, right? So if you look at conditions like POTS or other forms of dysautonomia or dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, we're not adapting well to challenge. We see this a lot with complex PTSD and PTSD in general as well, that, for example, someone who faced a challenge like they got distracted while they were driving, they look back at the road, the brake lights are on ahead of them, they have to slam on their brake, their heart rate's going to go up. It's going to happen for all of us. That's normal, natural stress response. But how quickly do we recover from that? If you are someone with a history of PTSD and more dysregulation of your autonomic nervous system, a normal everyday challenge can throw you off for the rest of the day. And we see this, like I had a fight with my spouse, or my child triggered me, or I was late to work, and the rest of the day gets thrown, or the rest of the week, right? Depending on the nature of the stressor and one's adaptability. So looking at this with posture, this early study was actually looking at what happens when our posture gets stuck in kind of certain constrictions. Going back to that connection with somatic psychology, we know that life's challenges can lead us to carry tension. It leads us to carry tension in the hips, in the belly, in the diaphragm, across the chest, bracing in the shoulders, in the neck and throat, right? So we tend to carry tension. We can carry it in the arms and legs too, in the joints of the body. And that chronic tension shapes our body, right? And when it occurs, especially developmentally over time, we might develop postures that reflect our environment. Think about a dog that's been abused, right? The way that dog has its tail curled under, right? Or you know, is kind of, you see it in my posture, right? Like, but we see this in humans, the way that our pelvis will tuck under, right? Or we had to brace in order to survive, and we're braced out, right? And we have, and our spine is almost overly extended as a result. So what we look at in terms of a spinal reflection of postural efficiency and vagal efficiency is actually the ability to have a fluid and flexible spine. And so it's that ability to move rather fluidly and freely between different postural states. So this early study was actually looking at the impact of Rolfing on the posture of the body, and recognizing that there was an increased vagal tone when the pelvic tilt, when a inefficient pelvic tilt was corrected. So kind of fascinating. I had a conversation, I've engaged in quite a few conversations with Dr. Porges over the last several years, because he accompanies me in a training that I teach on therapeutic yoga for trauma with applied polyvagal theory. And so in discussing this study with him directly, one of the things that we really both concluded is that it's not so much that we're trying to go out there and achieve perfect posture. It's that we don't want to get stuck in inefficient postural stances that then become our identity, that then define how we're responding to the world. So we want to be able to actually have access to the full range of self, and our spinal flexibility helps us do that. So what might this look like then if we were to incorporate something like this in session? One of the things that I speak about in some of my other books around posture as well is about how posture is a form of implicit memory, right? That our postures give us feedback about other times we felt that way, right? So that if we're sitting there like this, kind of slumped over, right, we're more likely to feel sad, depressed. We're more likely to remember other times that we felt that way. That's how state-dependent memory works, right? So we're keying in, or we're accessing times in which we felt this way. Now, given that there is no bad or wrong state of the nervous system, as we go towards a postural experience, it might give us access into those implicit memories, and now we have access to working with them. Lovely, if the client's ready, right? We also have access to posture as resource, right? This is built into something like the Best Foot Forward protocol, if you're familiar with that in EMDR. It's a performance-based protocol where you remember times that you have been felt really confident, been really successful, felt really empowered. How did you stand? How do you feel in your body now when you think about that? Let's go ahead and stand that way and allow yourself to feel that. So if you need to go give a public talk or a presentation or show up for whatever it is, right? Any of those performances we might do, we can access that, and you can add in your bilateral to the felt sense in the body with that sense of confidence. So we can use posture as a resource, or we can use posture as a way in for exploration of traumatic experience.
Yeah, so the posture, when repeated, it becomes part of the identity, and that's part of what we're correcting. Um, I'm wondering, one of the questions that we had was, what makes yoga for trauma recovery different from regular yoga? I think you spoke a little bit about it, but if you can say more about that. And maybe one more question is, for therapists who are not trained as yoga trainers or yoga, specifically for trauma, what is an ethical use in session? So what can I do? I'm not trained in yoga. What can I do with my clients in terms of yoga work, incorporating yoga work into therapy that is ethical?
So what makes yoga for trauma different? First of all, if you go back to some of the work of David Emerson, and he worked closely at Bessel van der Kolk's clinic with the Trauma Research Center and did some of the earliest work on trauma-sensitive yoga. So he really speaks about the importance of safety and choice, that we use what we call invitational language when we're teaching trauma-informed yoga, so that we are inviting the client to explore what, that everything is an option. He describes the whole practice as a practice in making choices. And that if we practice in the environment of the relative safety of your yoga mat, how do I want to move today? What feels like a yes? What feels like a no? How does my body give me feedback about my yes and my no? What feels good? What doesn't feel good? As I'm building that relationship with myself, that practice in making choices then becomes relevant off of the mat. So when we go into the world, we now have more access to, oh yeah, I got that same feeling I got on my yoga mat that was like, that didn't feel so right. Or yes, this is a very clear yes, I want to go towards that. So we've got the invitational language. We've got practice in making choices. We've got a lot more orientation to safety in the room, more emphasis on that. When I teach, so I've been teaching therapeutic yoga classes since 2008. I've kind of always taught them in relatively kind of small batch classes with 6 to 8 students, and it's intimate and it's tailored to who's in the room. And then when the pandemic hit, I took all of my yoga classes online. And so it's kind of changed form, but it has actually been profoundly instrumental across these last 2.5 years, because it's taken people who have been in quarantine and in isolation all around the world, and through the windows of our kind of Zoom community experience, we have connection, we have practice together, we feel heard, we feel seen. There's a lot of elements to that that I would speak to. One of which is that I really feel that one of the key elements to therapeutic yoga has to do with community and safe community, because trauma doesn't happen in isolation, and the healing of trauma also needs to happen in community. And what is safe community? And so how do we cultivate community environments where we can actually feel like we belong, that it's healing wounds of feeling like an exile in the world in some way, and feeling held in the safe enough space of other people to share a little bit about our experience, and just have that be revered and honored and acknowledged, and where grief, which is very much a social emotion, gets to be held in community. So it's one of the things that I love about being a yoga teacher, right, and teaching these classes. So your second question about what can I do as a therapist, right? So maybe there's others on here who are also yoga teachers, maybe others who teach group classes. And this book, the Therapeutic Yoga for Trauma Recovery, can guide some of how you might incorporate this into a class that you're teaching. There's also a section in the book, an appendix about how you might design a one-on-one session with a client based on kind of what is their intention, what are they bringing into their room, how might we tailor the practices to meet their needs. Now, if you are not a yoga teacher and don't have that background, I think that a lot of the sensory guided practices, the mindfulness practices, the loving kindness and compassion practices are just accessible for everyone. And in fact, some of the very simple yoga-based practices of exploring, for example, that seated spinal flexibility and the 6 directions of the spine, again, very accessible. We're not really doing any harm so long as the client is listening to their own body and just exploring how it feels to bring in a little bit of movement. And then, it just really depends on you and your client and also your access to support. I was teaching this earlier today, and one of the attendees of the course was asking very similar question of like, well, do I need to get ongoing supervision and consultation specific to this? And I think, why not, right? Like I'm personally a huge fan of ongoing consultation and supervision. I still get ongoing consultation and supervision because it helps us address the blind spots in our work. So when we're working with yoga, specifically when we're working with the body, that we want to still really be attending to the therapeutic relationship, to the impact of choice and power and dynamics that are showing up in the room. And so the more that we can talk about what we're doing in the, I was teaching for the UK today, but in the privacy of our clinical work, right? In the privacy of our sessions, the more that we can bring that and talk about that with a consultant or a supervisor, the more likely that we're going to get feedback to make sure that we're doing that ethically and wisely.
That's a great answer. And I just want to mention that every chapter in your book ends with some exercises. So if people want to learn more, there's exercises with pictures, and also there's your YouTube channel that you show a lot of yoga.
The YouTube channel is for everybody. I will share that. So there are, oh goodness, I want to say over 100 videos on there now. It was my pandemic project because when we all got kind of stuck at home, one of the things that I really wanted to do was make the therapeutic yoga as accessible as possible. I believe that I've now achieved that goal. There's almost 10,000 subscribers to the channel. And I get feedback from clinicians all over the country, in fact, all over the world, saying they're referring their clients to it. It finally helps them access some therapeutic yoga safely from their homes. And the classes really range. If you ever have taken a class with me, you will know that they're not necessarily easy classes. I make a differentiation that my approach to therapeutic yoga for trauma is not restorative yoga. We are actually engaging in not only calming practices, but also very energizing practices to build more of that vagal efficiency. So we are going to challenge your nervous system. You can, of course, with safety and choice, opt in or opt out of any practice, because that's the most important element, is that you're really honoring and discovering what works for you. But there by all means, each class will offer some form of a challenge.
Thank you for your time today with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.